thank you for being here. And I promised Greg I would stay behind this podium. It's very contrary to my nature, since I'd like to move a little more. So I'm going to do my best to stay in one place and sit still for a little bit. As my mom used to always tell me that, sit still. I appreciate being in a place that has an opening prayer. And I think of all the times I've had the opportunity to share this kind of information, this is the first time I've had someone pray on my behalf, and Dale, I appreciate that. And I'm sure I'll be blessed by that. This is a great institution. And every time I come here, and I was here, as you saw, many, many years ago, I have a great series of memories because I learned things here, and it prepared me for a lot of things in my life that have been just great blessings. And so I hope you'll take advantage of the opportunities you have while you are here. And I appreciate your time. I'll say that in advance, and if you don't leave, I'll thank you at the end. But you've invested your time to be here, and I hope I can share something with you that in some way may influence some of your actions or your thoughts as you go forward. Now, leadership is a topic that you could talk about, and you do. There's courses on leadership, there's schools about that, and I think if you do an Amazon search, you'll get maybe 100,000 titles on leadership. So I don't pretend to have the answers or all the answers or the secret to it, but I have learned a lot over the years. And in my sort of 25-year career working, I've learned some things later that I wish I'd known earlier, and some things actually that have helped me not just in my role as a leader in industry, but also in my home and in my community and the other ways that I've had the opportunity to lead. And I'll give you some context as we go through this, a little bit of what I think leadership is, so that as we talk about it, you'll see kind of my thoughts on what it is. And then we'll talk about what I wish I had known earlier. So I want to start with the great wisdom of Scott Adams. And I don't know if Scott Adams rings a bell, but hopefully this next slide will here. And I recognize not all of you are engineers, but I know many of you are. And Scott Adams has a wonderful way of relating the real workforce. Unfortunately, he's more accurate than not in many ways, but I'll let you read through this. So a few chuckles, you're like, wait a minute, do I get that? Yeah, so they're often, this is a perspective on leadership from someone who worked inside large corporations, and one that maybe others would share. I'll show you another slide here that I saw on someone's cubicle wall a few years back. Because, and by the way, if you're ever having a bad day, go to this website, www.despair.com. I don't have any personal interest in them, but they're really funny. And they're kind of spoofs because you'll see sometimes people use these inspirational things to be inspirational. And eagles, for whatever reason, are somehow chosen as a symbol of leadership. But I like this. Leaders are like eagles. We don't have either of them here. And I would say that there probably is a lack of great leadership skills in the world and in the workforce. And as we'll get to in a second here, I think all of us have some responsibility to be leaders and an opportunity to be leaders. And so before I go to the next slide, I'm going to ask you to take 20 seconds and do just a little quick exercise. And I won't ask you to share this, but I want you to, in your own head, I want you to think of 5 people who you would describe as influential leaders in your life. And you don't even have to write them down, but just 5 people who, if you were asked, you would describe as influential leaders for you personally. So hopefully you got a couple of them. We'll ask you to refer back to them in a little bit. Let me start with a quote that I like that will frame, hopefully, the rest of our discussion. You may have seen this before, but I find that it's easy to think about what somebody else should do differently. And in fact, there's professions of people that are called analysts that talk about what somebody else should do. And sometimes we fall in the trap ourselves of talking about what somebody else or something else should be different to make the world a better place. What I'd like to do is in the next 30 minutes that we're talking together, to keep in mind, what can I do? If there's something I listen to or I hear or I think about, what can I do to make the world the place I want it to be? because ultimately we are the only people that we have complete control over, and therefore that's the most powerful element for change, right, is it starts with us. And so as we go through this, kind of keep that in mind. This is particularly important as I talk to groups of people and businesses. Everyone is really quick to throw rocks at their leaders and say what's wrong with their managers and their leaders. And that doesn't really get you nearly as far as thinking about what you can do differently. So let's start with, this is where it's really hard for me to hold still here. I'd like to be moving around, but I'm doing it. What is the word, and this is the part where audience participation is okay, what does the word leadership imply? Just the word itself. What does it imply? And I promise this isn't a trick question, but just tell me what do you think?
One person above other people.
Okay, so for you, one person above other people. Okay, what else? What else is implied in leadership?
The ability to influence others.
Okay, ability to influence others.
Ethical values.
Okay, so for you, there's a piece of ethics and values in leadership.
Facilitator.
Okay, facilitator, great.
Art to it.
Okay, there's an art to it. So I think all of those things are true characteristics of leadership. But one of the things to me that's fundamental about leadership, and this is, you're going to say duh, but here's what it is followership. If people aren't following, you're not leading, right? Fundamentally, you could be a dictator, you could be a boss, you could be all kinds of things. But if people aren't following, and I would put forth following voluntarily, okay? So to me, when I talk about leadership, what I think of is people that voluntarily follow. Now what comes from that are two things that are very important. Not all managers then are leaders, and I don't want to disparage management. Management's a different topic for a different day and is critical. So doing things in the right order, in the right way, having indicators, having processes, having structure, administering things, that's critical. But not all managers are necessarily leaders. The flip side of that, though, is also equally important, which is many great leaders are not managers. Those two words don't mean the same thing. And so if you, and I won't ask you to do this, but if you think through your list of 5 people that you described as influential leaders, I would be willing to venture that nobody has worked for all 5 of them. And many of you haven't worked that much in your career, so you wouldn't have had an opportunity to. But I talk about this with people who have 20 or 30 years working, and nobody in any of the thousands of people in any country I've talked to about this yet have ever worked for all 5 of the people they characterized as inspirational leaders. In fact, rarely do people have worked for more than one. And in many cases, there are people on that list, and maybe your list is this way, who you've never met. Is that true for anybody? Raise your hand. On your list of inspirational leaders, there's a person you've never met. Now, isn't that remarkable? That's very common. Maybe half the room says there's someone who's an inspirational leader for you that you've never met. In fact, I have someone on my list of inspirational leaders who had died long before I was ever born. So how is it then that someone who you've never met, or maybe who hasn't even lived in the same time period you're living in, could be an inspirational leader for you, someone that you might choose to follow or do something differently in your life because of what they've done? So as I thought about that, and I started maybe 10 or 15 years ago kind of thinking about this, what I realized was there's some things that you can do to be that kind of a leader. So here's a couple more points on what I think leadership is. I think, to me, leadership is about making a difference. And why do I say that? If everything is just great the way it is in your life or in everybody else's life, we don't need leaders. We just keep doing exactly what we're doing. Now, generally, life doesn't work that way. And certainly in any company, if you sit still, you're going to get left behind. That's just the nature of the world today, so that you need to be constantly moving. So to me, leadership is about making a difference. It can be making a difference in the life of one person, 1,000 people, or 1,000,000 people, but leaders make a difference. I think leadership, and this is where it gets maybe sort of the Dane spin on this. I think leadership is about people and is about ideas. Now, people, again, because you have to have followers to be a leader, and followers are people. So leadership is about people. And it doesn't mean you have to love people to be a good leader, like large crowds. That's okay. I actually am not a big, large crowd person myself, believe it or not. I prefer sort of smaller groups. But you can be a great leader regardless of your personality style, your preferred interaction style. But leadership is about people and it's about ideas. Because again, why would I choose to follow you or do what you're asking me to do? Well, because you have an idea or a direction or a vision or a passion or something that appeals to me, that I can relate to. And therefore, to me, leadership is about hearts and minds. And those of you who are scriptorians will recognize that those terms are fairly common, hearts and minds. It's about what people will give you voluntarily, not what you can make them do. So to me, management is a little bit more about hands. It's about following a process or a procedure, doing things a certain way. Leadership is about hearts and about minds. And so therefore, to me, leadership is emotional and future-oriented. You know, great leaders to me don't complain, don't spend all their time complaining about the past or saying what's wrong with, what happened yesterday. Great leaders look forward. They look for what could be, what might be able to be, what should be, what they want it to be. And leadership is emotional. And at companies, and I started this discussion, and most people I talk to about this work in companies, sometimes we're taught to leave our emotional self behind. We want to put on our rational self, and we want to be data-driven and structured and disciplined and all those kind of things that we have on our posters, but we don't want to be kind of emotional. And when I worked for Intel, which I did for almost 14 years, as a company, I think I was the first person in the history of the company to actually say the word love on a slide. And I took it off later, but emotional means that, right? That there's something that touches people in a way that they feel something. So this gets me to the question of what should I do? We get back to Gandhi's quote. If I want to be a leader, if I want to practice leadership skills, if I want to improve, what should I actually do? And the list could be very long. And I have a sort of 2-hour version of this lecture that I talk more about the list. But in the 30-minute version, there's one thing that if this is the only thing, if you leave this lecture and someone says, "What did you learn?" Okay, like when you used to come home from Sunday school, those of you who went, and your parents would always say, "What did you learn?" And young women's or young men's, whatever. And this is your answer, okay? This is the answer I want you to give. One of the most powerful leadership principles that I've ever come across is to see what is right in the world and others. Now, again, that may seem like kind of a duh thing, but let me tell you why I think this is much easier said than done and how I came to this conclusion. And I'll just kind of build the rest of the slide out. I want to tell you some stories now, and this is again where it's hard for me to sit still, but these are fun stories for me. But we're going to talk about how to train a whale, how to fill a bucket, and how to take a beautiful picture. And I'll tell you kind of how that matters. So many years ago, in fact, when our family had moved to Costa Rica, and the downside to having a child in the room is that she'll be able to vouch for these stories, whether or not that I'm embellishing this or not, which I'm hopefully not. The way I remember it, we actually had an 8-week-old golden retriever puppy, and I wanted to train this puppy, and I was convinced that I wanted a well-trained dog, and I wanted this dog to be obedient, and so I got a book about how to train a dog, and I read the book, and what the book said to do was you put a choke collar on a dog, and a choke collar is kind of a loop of chain that runs through a bigger collar, and you hook it onto the leash, and when you pull it chokes the dog, right? And what you do is you walk in a square, and when you get to one corner, you stop, and the dog kind of wanders away like they do, and then you start walking the other direction, and the dog goes right and gets pulled along. And after about a lap and a half of this, I was about to break down in tears, right? Because little 8-week-old golden retriever puppies are really cute. And I'm dragging this like really cute, innocent dog around by its neck. And I'm thinking, this is not a good way to train a dog, and I can't handle it emotionally. So I came back and I told my wife, this isn't going to work. I got to get a new book, right? So it occurred to me, and we had as a family been visiting SeaWorld in San Diego for a while. It occurred to me that people who train big animals can't use choker chains, right? So there's got to be some different tactics. So sure enough, I found a book on how they train killer whales. And subsequent to that, there's been lots of books written on the methods they used and SeaWorld had used to train other animals. Because if any of you have been there, they have a show, they train cats, they train geese, they train little piglets, things that pigs are really smart, but I don't know, geese, I don't know, but things that you didn't think you could train, right? And they trained them. And you say, wow, how do they do that? So picture that you're training a killer whale, and you say, roll over, and it doesn't. What do? You send it to timeout, like go sit in the corner of the pool, bad whale, 3 spanks or something, you weigh 10,000 pounds, but come over here, I'm going to, So what do? Well, here's what they do, is they ignore it. What they do is they try to get the whale to do something it does well, naturally, which in the case of a killer whale is kind of swim up on a little platform, because they innately do that to eat baby seals on the ice, so they can kind of do that. And then you give it lots of loves, and you say, good killer whale, and you give it food, and so it learns, hey, if I do what you ask, I get good things. And then you try to get it to do something a little harder. And if it doesn't do it, you just ignore it. And then you get to do something easy, and you give it lots of praise. And so basically what they do is ignore what the animal does wrong and praise what the animal does right. And the result is remarkable. They train these animals in unbelievable ways. And so I said, I'm going to try that with my dog. The book says, get some treats, put them in your pocket, take your dog out to a field, and it had the same walk a square pattern. But this time when the dog comes back to you, give it a little treat. And then walk to the next corner, and the dog will wander around, and then when the dog comes back to you, give it a little treat. Well, pretty soon, this dog would not leave my side. Unbelievable. And as the dog got bigger, we were running buddies, and we'd go jogging, and this dog would not leave my side. Cute boy dogs would run by, she wouldn't move. Right there, right next to me. Right? This dog was faithful dog. Unbelievably well-trained, wouldn't bark, wouldn't jump up on people. People were astounded that I had this really well-trained dog. All I did was recognize her for the things she did right. So I'm going, wow, this is really cool. This is working for my dog. At the same time in my life, I had been given a responsibility at work that was kind of above my head. I'd been given a job that I really wasn't fully qualified for, and I was responsible for a lot of people. And many of them were older than me. In fact, almost all of them were. They were more experienced. They knew more, and I was feeling a little bit kind of overwhelmed in terms of what am I going to do to lead these people? I don't, am I the right person? And I had 5 kids, and I felt like I wasn't really as good of a dad as I should have been and could have been. And I thought, I got to figure something out to get better here. And then I came across this great book. This second book, How Full Is Your Bucket? And another one actually called The Power of Positive Parenting by Glenn Latham. He was a professor at Utah State, and had a kind of a course on this that's in fact online. And anybody that is a parent or when you become a parent, I would go online and read this course. It's incredible. But I found this book, and I was reading this book, and this book, How Full Is Your Bucket, is written by a grandfather and his grandson. The grandfather was one of the founders of positive psychology, and his grandson is a Gallup researcher, and he was studying how do you get employees engaged in companies, and how do you get people involved. And the grandfather had initially studied a group of prisoners from U.S. prisoner of war camps in Korea, in the Korean War. And he studied the rest of their lives, and he found that there was this group of prisoners from 2 particular camps that really, really struggled to adjust to life. They couldn't hold a job, they had substance abuse problems, they couldn't stay married, their lives were really, really terrible. And so he went to go study what these camps did, and he figured he'd find all kinds of new ways of torture and abuse and whatever. And what he found was astounding. What he found was there was no barbed wire, there were no fences, there were no armed guards, and there was no physical torture at all. And he thought, wow, this is very interesting. And as he learned more, what he realized they did is they had a systemic campaign to take out everything good from their environment and recognize everything negative. So if you got a letter from home that said that your mom died, you would get that letter immediately. If you got a letter that said your sister just got married or your wife had a healthy baby or whatever, you'd never see it. So you never got good news, you only got bad news. If you tattled on one of your fellow soldiers who was talking about escaping, they'd give you double rations. If you didn't, they'd starve you. So if your tent mate took off and you didn't say anything, then you wouldn't eat. And so they systemically did this to the point where one of the prisoners of war said people would crawl up in a corner, pull a blanket over their head and die. That's how difficult the environment was. So this researcher said, wait a minute, the grandfather, the positive psychologist said, if the negative is so powerful, maybe the positive can be equally powerful. And so he did a landmark experiment that's been repeated since then in a school classroom. And they took a math class and they divvied it up into 3 sections. The students, I don't know if they knew they were part of an experiment, but they divvied it up into 3 sections. And same teacher, and they would teach the math, give the exams. The first group of students got back exactly the same sheet of paper they turned in. Okay, no marks on it other than what they'd written. The second group got back what was the traditional scoring method. And what would a traditional scoring method you think on a paper look like? Right, you'd see like red marks like -2, -6, -7, circle 78 or something, right? The third group got back only marks of what they did right. And I don't know if they used maybe a different color, but +2, +6, +8, +9, good job. That's all they got back, is what they did right. And then they tracked the performance of these 3 randomly selected groups over time. And they watched, and after the first little bit, the first group, what do you think happened to the first group? Nothing, right? They didn't get any better. Because they didn't know anything. They just, whatever they turned in, they got back. They got no feedback. The second and third group started progressing. They were getting better. What happened was interesting, though. About partway through the semester, the second group plateaued and started to decline. And although they finished off better than the first group, they were higher than the first group, the third group was more than they had made twice the progress the second group had made. So those who were told just what they did right did twice as well as those who were told what they did wrong. And you might argue it's the same thing. But what his research showed and what subsequent research to that showed is that it isn't the same thing. That being told what you're doing right is a much more powerful reinforcer of behavior than being told what you've done wrong. And if this was a group where more people were married, I could tell you lots of analogies with spouses in this. I've experienced this, right? If any of you are, the conversation, if you, for example, say, honey, that dress really makes you look a little bit chunky. How does that go over? Not so well, does it? Now, what if it does? You don't say anything. And then when she wears the other dress, you go, you look stunning in that blue dress. And guess what she wears the next time you go on a date? The blue dress. It's really that easy. And the same is true in reverse, right? Same is true in reverse. This principle works both directions, but it's incredibly powerful. So I said, you know what? I got to try this out because this might be part of the answer to one of my challenges here. And what they talk about, the title of the book is every interaction you have with every human being every day, we all have an emotional bucket. And that interaction either fills that bucket, you either feel better after you leave that interaction, or you feel worse, you feel emptier. So you're either a bucket filler or a bucket dipper, in their terms, for everyone you interact with. And what they put forth is, it is much more powerful to be a bucket filler. And I think you probably know this, right? You probably have some friends that you like to hang around because you always feel better when you're around them. And being around them lifts you up. And you probably have some other friends who, when they call you, go, oh, shoot. Because you know it's going to be like this, oh man, it's going to kind of drag you through some really painful things, okay? So the question for us is, are we bucket fillers or bucket dippers? And as I looked at my own behavior, I started saying, what is it that I'm rewarding and reinforcing? What is it that I see as a leader and as a parent? And I'd been struggling to get my kids to take their dishes to the sink. And what I saw was all the things they didn't do. And so I'd be like, hey, come back and get them. Every kid, come back, get your plate, put it in the... And I said, okay, what if I try another experiment? And I wait till a kid does it right. I ignore when they do it wrong, and it's kind of a bummer on me, I have to clear the dishes. But I wait for someone who does it right. And sure enough, one day, and I think it was the child that happens to be here she actually took her dishes. And I said, Alexis, thank you so much for clearing your dishes. I really appreciate that. That makes things a lot easier for Mom and I. Guess what happened to the other 4 kids? Boom, back to the table. Oh, I cleared mine too. Look, Dad, I'm putting mine in the sink, right? Because they wanted positive reinforcement. Same thing, kid comes home, throws the backpack on the floor, throws the shoes on the ground. First reaction, put your shoes on the shoe shelf, you know where your backpack goes, it doesn't belong in the middle of the floor. And that takes energy. And different way to do it is say, okay, what do they do right? Hey, Cameron, I really appreciate that you came right home from school so that I know you're here and you can get working on your homework and you're not off goofing around. Thank you. Wow. Big difference. So this is starting to gel in my mind as a leader, and I'm starting to do this at work. And I'm starting to look for what people are doing right and tell them that. And it's starting to make a difference. And then I come across the opportunity here to meet a National Geographic photographer. Not the one who took this picture, in fact, but one who told me a story. This picture was taken in 1985, and it's just one of my favorite pictures of just a hauntingly beautiful picture. And if you're interested, they went back and 17 years later to find this girl, and it took a lot of effort, and they found her, and she had lived, which was amazing in Afghanistan to have gone through that. And they have another picture of her, what she looked like 17 years later, and you can see how hard her life was just in that picture. But this photographer was assigned to go take a cover picture for National Geographic. And this is a story he told that really affected me. He said he went out to his shoot, his first time he'd gotten this assignment. He woke up, and it was a 3-day shoot. He woke up the first day and it was pouring rain. And he said, oh, I guess today's lost, but I have 2 more days and I'll be okay. Tomorrow's another day, it'll be okay. So he gets up the second day, it's pouring rain. And now he says he's getting a little nervous. He's thinking, oh shoot, I only have 1 more day. This is my big chance. First time, if I blow this, this could be it. So I'm really hoping that, third day is going to be a good day. He gets up the third day, guess what? It's pouring rain. So his first reaction is, all is lost. I've blown it. My future, my whole life is ruined. National Geographic says they don't pay you for attempts, they pay you for pictures. And so, I've failed. And he thought, well, I got nothing to lose. I might as well go out in the rain and take a few pictures. And he proceeded to show these pictures he had taken, which were stunning. And pictures of a petal of a flower through a drop of rain, and 1 ray of light coming through a cloudy sky. And then he showed the picture that was actually the cover picture for National Geographic that he had taken on that day that was pouring rain. And this is what he said. He said, do you know what changed between the first day and that cover picture? Okay, the weather didn't change, the camera didn't change, the location didn't change. What changed? Only his attitude. That's it. He said, what I realized was I had the wrong pair of glasses on. I had put on my cloudy day glasses, and I approached everything that way. When I put on a different pair of glasses, I could see what was right in that picture. I found a cover picture. And so this cemented it for me. I said, okay, wow. This is 3 different people, 3 completely different fields, different professions. I'm going to start working on this. And I have. And I can tell you I'm not perfect. People that know me know that I'm not perfect, but I can tell you what I've experienced has been unbelievable. And it's a very simple thing, and it almost sounds so simple that you almost would ignore it. But in any company, and maybe you do this, if you bring some work to somebody, if I bring you a 4-slide presentation and I say, give me some feedback on my presentation, what do you tell me? Your natural reaction would be, well, slide 1 has way too many words, and I'm not really sure what the point is. And slide 3 has these graphs that don't really fit, and the colors are kind of crummy, and I don't know what that bar chart really even means. You got to really work on that. That would kind of be what we're trained to do, right? What if I gave you the same 4 slides and you said slide 2 is really crisp, and you have only 7 words on the slide, the point is really clear, and slide 4, those charts are excellent. I get the point right from looking at them. They fit. It's the right kind of chart for the data. I think that's great. I'm probably smart enough, like those students were in the class, to realize I should go work on slide 1 and slide 3, right? Because you told me what was right. I can figure out what's wrong. And you know what? That's true with most of us. Most of us can figure out what's wrong if we're told what's right. Now we need boundary conditions, we need to know the rules, we need to know what's expected of us, but generally, if we're told what's right, we can figure out what's wrong. And so what I'd put forth to you is, as a leader, one of the most powerful ways to have people want to follow you is to show them what's right. Because they'll feel better when they're around you, they'll feel like being around you helps see what's right, that what you want is for things to be better. and you'll find that your influence on other people grows. And I've tested this across cultures, and it works great. So I have a team of people, and have for many years, that are from all over the world. And they've been over to our home. I have good relationships with these people. And they're from different cultures and different backgrounds, but you know what? Every single one of them resonates with this idea. And some of them, when they've given me performance feedback to me, have specifically said how much they appreciate that when they come visit with me, they're not afraid of getting beat up. They're not afraid of getting put down. That what they'll learn is the things that they're doing right. And so it makes a really powerful difference. So that's the one thing. There's lots of other things that I could share with you, but the most powerful thing, and test this out. Go home today with your roommate, with your spouse, whatever you are, and try for 6 hours to only point out what things are right. And you'll find it's a little hard, but you'll be amazed at the positive impact it can have. Okay, let me just share a few last things, and we'll leave some time for questions. I want to share just a perspective on happiness. And this, again, isn't the answer to this, but this is after having lived a few things in my life, some things that I think have resonated with me. A good mentor of mine many years ago said this to me, but their quote was, change your mind or change your job. In your case, I changed it to change your major, and maybe that's too late for some of you. Some of you may not be. Point being is, don't be miserable. And you can do both. Okay, I've been in places where I had to change my mind. I had to put on a different pair of glasses and find out what about the situation I could like, I could feel good about, and sure enough, it made it totally different for me. There have been times when I couldn't, and so I changed my job. But don't be miserable. It's just not worth it, and you'll live below your potential if you do. Know who you want to be. A lot of times people ask you what you want to be when you grow up, and we're always focused on what you want to be. Know who you want to be. I would put forth to you that most great leaders know who they want to be. And because they know who they want to be, you can decide, I want to follow them, because I want to be like the person they are. So think about that. The what will take care of itself if you know who you want to be. This is a tough one, right? Because everything the world does tells you need to compare yourself to somebody else. But it's one of the most destructive things you can do, because you're you. And you're not the same as anybody else that's in this room or anybody else that's on this campus. You're you. Comparing yourself to somebody else doesn't help you or doesn't help them. Compare yourself to who you want to be and aspire to be that person. But don't compare yourself as much to somebody else. And that goes for everything. And I live in a world where, boy, what people wear and what cars they drive and what kind of house they have matters a lot to people. And they stress a lot about that. But those things really don't matter when it comes to happiness. This is an easy one here, but do something for someone else. Greg shared with me one of the outlines of your leadership curriculum, and one of the things you're encouraged to do is go serve. Boy, that's outstanding. It's one of the best ways to realize your problems aren't as big as you thought they were, and to feel better about yourself is to go do something for someone else. It's just a great thing. Those of you who have served full-time missions have understood that, and sometimes we forget it when we come back, but this is important. Another good mentor at a point in my career when I thought the world was falling apart and I had this terrible thing and I thought my life was ruined, and he sat me down and said, look, Dane, things are never as bad as they seem. And he was right. That's a true statement. Now, he also told me things are never as good as they seem, so when things are going really well, don't get too excited about it because something will go wrong. And that turned out to be right too. But they're never as bad as they seem. So if you're at a time in your life when things really seem tough, don't give up. Things really aren't as bad as they seem. Be grateful. You've heard that from lots of other people that are more qualified to teach about than I am. But it's a true principle. If you appreciate what you have, you'll find yourself a lot happier than if you worry about what you don't have. And I associate with people who have a lot. And some of them, one of them, in fact, who has like $18 billion. And I can tell you that because he's not happy with what he has, he's having a real hard time being happy. And he can have anything. And this one is don't worry forward. And boy, I'm bad at this. And I still today can worry about my grandkids who I don't have yet. But I'm worried about them, and the world they're growing up in. And, I don't know. It's going to be a tough world for those kids when they come along. It doesn't help, does it, right? Sufficient is the day unto the evil thereof, right? So you can worry about today and what you did today and what you're going to do the next 6 hours, and worry about what you're going to do tomorrow. 3 years from today will take care of itself, I promise. It really will. And this last one is be careful how you measure success, because you may get what you measure. And again, the world teaches you lots of ways to measure success, and there are lots of ways people could tell you to measure success. Just be careful how you do, because you may find you get what you strive for. Just make sure it's the right thing. And then one last slide of random thoughts, and I promise I'll stop here. The more I learn, the less I know. And this is important. Many times in my life, I've thought I knew a lot. Not all, but a lot. And then something happens, and I realize how little I really did know. There's a lot to learn. You never want to stop learning, but don't ever trick yourself into thinking that you know a lot. Because you won't, you don't. The more I learn, the less I know. Simple is better than complex. This is true in engineering, it's true in business, it's true in the world. The simpler you can make something, the more likely it is to stick. And if you want other people to follow you, you got to be able to explain it in a way that they get. And so you got to work on simplicity. I use this as an example because I love it, because I have no idea. I would never understand any of the math that goes behind this. But I know what this is, and probably you do too, because it's E equals mc squared. And we all can remember energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. We couldn't remember all the rest that goes behind it. Everybody can find problems. And if you go to a company, you're going to find lots of people who can find problems. That isn't the skill that we lack. Right? What we lack is people who can solve them. So be a problem solver and not just a problem finder. You're going to have a much more successful career. And this one I realize is a little bit iffy to present here in a class, but let me explain it. You aren't going to be perfect all the time in everything you do. And when I was in your chair 25 years ago, someone who I viewed as being very successful in their life gave me some advice that I'll share with you. And I asked this person, how do you balance being a church leader, a good husband, a good father, and a business executive? How do you know when you have the balance? And he said, when I feel like I'm not the husband I could be, I'm not the father I could be, I'm not the executive I could be, and I'm not the church leader I could be, then I know I'm in balance. And I thought about that for a while, and you know what? There's a lot of wisdom in that, which is that you aren't going to be perfect at everything all the time, and you sometimes do need to make some trade-offs as to what you do and don't do, but it's okay to get a B in some things. You don't have to be perfect in everything that you do. This is, when you learn to drive, everybody told you look down the road, don't look at your hood, because when you stare at the hood, you tend to overreact to stuff and you jerk all over the road. And when you look further down the road, you steer a little more smoothly. So same thing, take the long view when you're steering. Don't let little obstacles. If you get a bad grade on an exam tomorrow, your life's not over and your major's not ruined and you haven't locked yourself out of all the happiness you want. Take the long view, right? You'll be okay. And then this last one is your parents have told you for years, but it's really true. Take care of yourself. And if you exercise, if you eat right, and if you sleep right, you're going to be much more productive and much more capable of leading others than if you don't. It's trivial, but based on the facts, a large percent of Americans aren't too good at this, and the world's increasingly following that lead. So don't neglect these basics. Stephen Covey used to talk about sharpening the saw, but there's a reality of this, that take care of yourself in the right ways. Okay, so that's all my speech. I'll leave you with one last quote that I really like, and this is I've seen in my own life too. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will not forget how you made them feel. And so as you lead forward, make sure you're making those moments where people remember how you made them feel. And I told you I'd thank you again since no one abandoned me, so thank you. And so we have 5 minutes or 6 minutes, I guess, technically on the clock there. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
How do you start your day?
How do I start my day? First thing I do is exercise. Next thing I do is read my scriptures, and the next thing I do is start to work. And if I don't do it in that order, I find that it doesn't really work as well. And usually we're pretty good at having family prayer unless my starting to work is too early for everybody else. But
When, if ever, do you find it appropriate to give negative reinforcement?
That's a great question. So the question was, when, if ever, do you find it appropriate to give negative feedback? And this is one I thought a lot about. And the answer I've come to is it's not. Now, in that class, I've told you about the power of positive parenting. There are some cases where you need to stop a behavior. If one of your kids is pulling your other kid's hair out, you need to stop the behavior. but you don't need to give negative feedback to the person at that time. And this is a tough one, but the more I've tried to practice, the more I've realized is I'm almost not sure there is a such thing as constructive criticism. Different than saying there's rules, right? People need to know the boundaries, and it's okay to say this is a boundary, and this is what we expect of you, and people need to know that. This is what we want you to accomplish. These are the conditions you have to work within. But giving someone negative feedback about that, unless they're endangering themselves or they're endangering somebody else, don't put your finger in a light socket. Absolutely, that deserves negative feedback. But go sit in timeout because you had a fit doesn't ever work. And I'm trying to eliminate all of that from my vocabulary. And every time I mess up, it has a bad outcome. And many times I thought, I want to tell my wife this one thing. We've been married for 25 years, and one of the things I'm most proud of in my life is my marriage. And hopefully if she was here, she'd tell you the same. We have a great marriage. It's a source of joy and happiness and most of what's good in my life. And every once in a while, even like 2 weeks ago, I thought, I'm going to tell her about this one thing. And I thought about it, and I said it like in the best way I could, and it is like a disaster. It just doesn't work. So anyway, that's my answer. I'm giving up. No more negative.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that you had as a leader, and how did you overcome them?
Question is, what are some of the biggest challenges I've had as a leader, and how did I overcome them? Part of it is knowing who I was. One of the challenges is feeling like I was over my head or underqualified or undercapable. And so I had to figure out, why would people want to follow me? And what did I have to offer? And as I came to know who I was and what I stood for and how I could communicate that, it became much, much easier to be a leader. And then, the other hard thing for me as a leader is when you have people who are not in the right job, how do you help them realize that? That's really tough, because they're going to be failing all the time. They feel like a failure. You are frustrated because they're not doing what you need them to do. So having the conversation with somebody about you might be in the wrong job is a really hard thing to do as a leader. But you owe it to the person and you owe it to yourself, and it's a hard one to have, and you don't have to be negative or critical about it, but that's a tough thing to do as a leader. Okay, good one. Anybody else think we have time for one or two more questions maybe?
You talked about the example of your child who comes home and they left the backpack and the shoes. So, not giving negative feedback, did you, I wonder, in a situation like that, would you pick up the backpack and the shoes, put them where they should be, or leave them where they should be?
Yeah, good question. So when the kid comes home and throws their shoes in their backpack where they shouldn't be, do you pick it up for them and do that? In that case, typically I would not, because it doesn't harm me to have it there. They've been taught it shouldn't be there, and what I found is if I praise them for doing something they should do, they go over and pick it up and put it away themselves. And if they don't, then it stays on the floor. There are cases where, like with the dishes need to get cleaned, so then I had to go do them. And that's a choice you make. And so I think depending on the instance, you may choose to do differently. But if it's something that really doesn't harm me, same thing at work. If someone doesn't do something that didn't tank an outcome, I don't beat them up for it.
You're okay with letting things not get done.
You have to be okay with imperfection. And you know what? God's that way, right? So he's living with all of us, so I think it's okay if we learn to live with some of the same things. So,
what do you feel like about the structure of maybe business or society that makes people seem to have incentive to give negative feedback so much?
yeah, so what is it about kind of how we learn that creates this incentive to give negative feedback? I don't have all the answers. I think there's some religious answers maybe to some of that I would offer up. In terms of what I'd say to a business audience, I'd say it's how we're trained from a very early age. Our parents and in the educational system, that's kind of how we're taught, and that's what we see. And so we have to undo a behavior that we've seen ingrained. And part of what I tell people when I say, hey, let's go off and let's be different. Let's start teaching people that you can be different, because that's what we've learned our whole lives. Fundamentally, I think there's a religious reason that goes beyond that. That there's sort of this, there's a constant influence to be negative or critical or put somebody else down. But I think we have to overcome that. And I think great leaders are some people who do. So Greg's probably giving me the sign here. So thank you all. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, and I appreciate your spending time with me.